With the new year starting, it felt like an opportune time to see exactly where United are at going into 2026. It's indisputable that 2025 was not a vintage year in the club's history. Some ups, a lot of downs, a lot of upheaval, and with so much up in the air, it felt like an opportune time to say, right, okay, where are we? Where are we going? There's so much speculation over Ruben Amorim's future in terms of the club are very clear with the press saying that there's no discussion over it. He's the man for the job. He has their total backing, which is fine. There's a lot more unrest, particularly after Tuesday's draw with Wolves, who picked up just their third point of the season at Old Trafford. Definitely been a shift in certainly the online discussion over where things are heading under Amorim. So I just wanted to welcome back Nik Storey, our analyst, to really get into the nuts and bolts of where things actually are, what can change, what needs to change, and how it should be done. So, Nick, thank you very much for joining. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Thank you, Steve. How are you?
I am all good, all good. Back in that headspace of wondering what on earth is going to happen at the next game, because there was a little time where I thought, hey, we're getting predictable again. You can kind of see what's coming. But that is well out of the window now. Because apart from we probably won't perform when we're expected to, and we probably will when we're not. And then if you take the Leeds game, which is the next game on Sunday, I think it's virtually impossible to call what's going to happen. But if we use the Wolves game as a jumping off point, I mean, it was the result, the performance, they weren't up to scratch, but the approach was a reversion, wasn't it, to a three-man defence after a four-man defence, a 4-2-3-1 against Newcastle, which certainly in the first half was executed very well. Second half was not a vintage performance. It was more of a backs to the wall, what we have we hold type show. But everyone's been hankering for this four-man defence. It did, and for a period, for a long period, Ruben was quite publicly not embracing it, didn't want to go that way. He's since admitted post Newcastle that that was to kind of control the narrative because I think he said if he'd done it too soon, it would have looked like he was doing it because of press pressure, which would have weakened him in front of the players. So I buy that. I buy that as part of a longer term strategy of showing who's boss and trying to put down the kind of roots of authority that any long term manager would want to do. What was your take on how things were approached against Wolves and like I say, use that as a jumping off point if you can, as to where we are and where things need to go.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it was a good idea. We didn't go too deep into the Wolves game, certainly with the feeling around the fan base at the moment, and yourself and myself spoke about that. It was a real tough one, wasn't it? And there's so many ways of looking at this. You could argue that to look at that game in isolation is, just picking your games, picking moments, and trying to review maybe a pre-held bias against the manager and say, this isn't good enough against arguably one of the worst teams to have played in the Premier League. When you look at the likes of, the Derby counties of the world, West Brom under Megson, etc. So, you could look at it like that, and that is slightly unfair. But if you look at it in the whole, or even in the consecutive games that we had, so the Newcastle second half you've mentioned, and the two halves we saw on Tuesday night at Old Trafford, that's when you start to look at patterns and you start to look at, are we learning from past mistakes? Is Amarim understanding the bigger picture? And I can't remember the exact stats now, but I'm sure it's something like 2 wins in 10, and we've got a number of um, issues in terms of consistency. So yes, we can definitely pick apart Wolves, and that's probably why we didn't do a big piece on it in its own right. But the more glaringly obvious issue is not learning from past mistakes. So yeah, Wolves, I think just straight off the bat in terms of the formation, we did expect the back four like we saw against Newcastle. And when that wasn't forthcoming, it's like, this is Wolves. We should be looking to use our system, use what works for us well. Certainly worked first half against Newcastle, and look to seek and exploit gaps in their 5-3-2 as it was, or 5-1-2-2. Wolves were playing quite an ambitious approach, to be fair to Edwards. So yeah, you can say it was a surprise, but you understand the rationale for it. And then you look into the game and say, right, where are the changes coming? Well, we've matched them up man for man. What's going to happen next? And I think that was more my bone of contention with the ways then looking to adapt in game. And whilst I didn't think the Xerxes sub was a bad one in its own right, it was the rationale behind it. So you've got Fletcher coming on, a left footer on the right side to try and combat their scheming left back Bueno. And that for me is like a negative way of looking at things. So it's, again, rather than taking things just as a one-off, it's looking at it in the whole and saying it does come back to the way Ruben Amorim sees the game. And I think we would have liked to have seen the 4-2-3-1, to be honest with you. And then that's the overall feeling you get from the Wolves game, not the actual draw in itself, if that makes sense.
So you spoke there, Nick, about amongst other things was the lessons that he's learned. Obviously, Ruben, I think he came out the other week and said that he would revisit, maybe, or in retrospect, 75% of his decisions he would change given the chance, which shows good self-awareness, but also shows that, there have been a lot of mistakes made. I mean, I would say, you've made the point yourself that he was 39 when he came, which is incredibly young for a Manchester United manager, or for any Premier League manager. Um, where if we really sort of take a step back on Ruben, how would you assess him in terms of where he's at, where he needs to go?
Yeah, big one, isn't it? I think the first thing to say is what you've just mentioned there. 39 years old. This is obviously the recruitment of a group of people. We can, for want of a better phrase, we'll just call them the board. They've set their sights on a goal and recruited accordingly. uh, I guess the broad principle would be: do you go towards a young up and coming tactician such as Ruben Amorim, as he was known, or would you go for the kind of the older head, the kind of the statesman like manager of the 90s type thing, or your Ancelotti type person? And the decision was made to go for Ruben Amorim. And the only thing I would say, apart from the age, which is a really incisive point, really, when it comes to Manchester United, in my point of view, I think you do need some level of experience of managing the ceremony, if you like, the occasion, the club, which is absolutely colossus, isn't it? It's a colossus. So there's definitely that element to it. So it was quite pertinent that you point towards that, Steve. And you actually have to look at what he was doing with Sporting Lisbon. And what we clearly see is a 3-4-3 or 3-4-2-1 formation at a club that, yes, it's huge in Portugal, but it's not at the same level. So, can you be a tactician in Portugal and take the club from, well, let's face it, wasn't doing as well as it normally did when Ruben took over, and implement something that's going to take you to the league? And that's what happened. And I think, what was it, consecutive title wins. And of course, we had this famous run in Europe there, and the mauling of City. And you kind of say, yeah, this guy knows his stuff, but it was very, very early in his career. And if you're going to then go for somebody like that, I think one of the things, in my view, should have been: does that system, does that approach, or shall we say principles that we always talk about, match the principles of Manchester United in this case? And that to me is still the biggest question. Yes, it can look a bit reductive to always talk about the 3-5-3, 3-5-2 blueprint as it's known, but a 3-4-3 in this case, and constantly bring that up as a something to beat him with. But it does actually point towards one of the key questions that we hope the board asks at the time. So there's no getting away from that fact. Now, it's not to say that we're always a swashbuckling 4-4-2. When as you may well know, Busby was often favoured three at the back. So it's a case of where was our squad when Amorim came in? Was it built to support his methods, his approach, his style? And if it wasn't, was there a discussion then about how he's going to play the system? When will he bring it on? When will he look to adapt? Whether that's 4-2-3-1 and then over to his favoured system, or as the case we see in the last 13 months, starting with the 3-4-3 and not adapting up until literally last month, where we've had players go out to AFCON. We've had the Bruno injury, the Mount injury, etc. And he's finally converted for what was 90 minutes. So it's an interesting one. That's the starting point, I guess, is to answer your question from the start, is what did the board see when they were recruiting Ruben? And secondly, did that age count against him? And I still think there's a good manager in there, and I think he's going to be a fantastic manager and coach. But I suspect that might be somewhere else, and I suspect that might be in 4 or 5, 6, 7 years' time.
Right. Well, obviously there's a bit of time to go before then. If we look at the here and now, what are the pros and cons of him in this position?
So I think we've looked at it, haven't we, Steve, as a kind of, is he a manager or is he a coach? Now, straight away, you might go, given the way he was recruited, he's a young up and coming coach. He's a tactician. He's one for the training ground and looking at the various you know tactical principles and understanding of how we can move forward. But I'd actually turn that around. I think he's a good manager. I think he harks back to the Ferguson days. He seems to be this eloquent young man. He's got charisma. He's very good at communicating upwards with the board, very good with communicating with the players. I think it's clear to see that the players are working for him. They're running for him. There isn't a giving up, as we say. There's a lot of analysis. So, the players aren't trying. They're not running for him. They're not, running for the badge. I don't think we can put that on the current team. I actually think there's too much of that at times. We need a little bit more lucidity in the thinking and the understanding and the tactical approach essentially. So I think he's more of a manager on balance than a coach, and that's at this present time, of course. So it's a case of, right, well, how can we build that kind of that coaching side, and what is it that Ruben's capable of? And I think he could prove a lot of the fan base wrong, and if he was given the resources, the players, etc. But we just don't know how long that will be. Um, yeah, because of what we're seeing in some of the cons of that, the rigidity of his coaching and the bit of the how can we say it? Sometimes he gets himself into a bit of a downward spiral, doesn't he? And he can't seem to pull himself back up from that. And it's just a case of when we see him and putting that run of games together that we saw, how can we build on that? And that's the problem. We're not seeing that consistency with him.
So, in terms of if you look at if we really hone in on the sort of formational approach, because that's been the major talking point, obviously. Do you want to talk us through, or do you mind talking us through the issues, fundamental issues of a three-man defense and how we're seeing that, how it's manifesting in United's season?
Yeah, so I think what I will say is that, you're playing 3-4-2-1. You're going to have to understand that every player has a specific role to play in the build. And sometimes, if that's not, even 90%, you're going to be vulnerable to that counter attack. You're going to be vulnerable at the back. And I think that's one of the surprises, really, that, you've got effectively a five-man defense in defensive transition, often a 5-4-1 with Amorim, and a 5-5-2-3 at times. And what you'd like to see there is a shored up defense. And the worry is we're not even seeing that. So we've had the two clean sheets all season that's been famously going round. Um, with the goals conceded column is right up there with your Wolves, your Burnleys, etc. And if that's not happening, then you can't build from that base. And that, I guess, is the worry. That'll play into the psychology of the players. When we look at the form of, well, De Ligt last season, not this season, where he's turned that around. Yoro, the opposite of that. Yoro having a fairly solid season in his first season last term, but this season looking like, a fish out of water at times. And, various players coming into that as well. Heaven now looking the part, but initially struggling in terms of the end of last season and the pre-season. And it does all play into, if the players are not, you know, cohesive there and understanding the defensive transition responsibilities, that then breeds through the team. So the lack of confidence starts to come through. And so it's no surprise to me that then when we have this kind of disjointed build, like 3-1-6 at times, and then just getting the ball up, Fernandez vertical of Casemiro into the wing backs, whether that's Dorgu and Ahmad or Dallo and Ahmad, and then in, as we say, so out then in. And it's no surprise to me then that our XG has been quite high because we're then getting shots off as soon as we can, trying to correct the negatives at the back, trying to correct that feeling that we will concede later in the game. So you've got this kind of disjointed approach. You've got this leaky back three, stroke five, a very kind of threadbare central midfield with Casemiro and Fernandez at the moment, and then out it goes to the wide areas, and then in it comes to the two tens and the nine. So I guess, to again answering your question in a long format, um, there's there's many issues, but I'd say the disjointedness of the build, the lack of understanding from the players, principally at the back, is causing the main issue. And just one more thing on that, when we want to go into specifics, we can pull up a diagram here as well. We're looking at the way De Ligt, obviously when he was fit, would be asked to invert from goal kicks and playouts. So that's simple. That's Le Mans into Shaw or Yoro in the 6 yard box. We then may go wide to a Dorgu who may be dropping from left wing back, and De Ligt would be asked to go effectively into the central midfield area, and then asking for the ball, or just being that kind of um, dummy, if you like, that kind of baiting the press from the opposition, and then back out it goes wide and away we go. That has never seemed to me to be consistent. Now, we consistently try it, but are we consistently being able to play out and to escape the high press from the opponent? And it's very, very rare that we do. Instead, we tend to go back out to the wing back or Shaw, and then it's a straight ball down the line into an Ahmad or an Mbumo in the 10 position, and then we've got our backs to the opposition's goal, and the ball just keeps on coming back, which again, something we've discussed many times this season, Steve, about Mbumo's role, and we'll probably come on to him at some point as well.
In terms of changing, because obviously a key word that you said there was disjointedness. Now, you can't have in any successful team, in any successful team sport, an element of disjointedness. All the dots have to be joined. So we've seen very briefly the 4-2-3-1 against Newcastle. How could that work if it was sustained?
So effectively, the players are not suited, in my view, to the 3-4-3. I think that's what we're saying. I think a lot of people are saying that, and that's due to maybe, previous positions they've played, previous clubs they've come from. I mean, just take Luke Shaw as a starter for 10. He's classic, obviously left back, loves to bomb on. He's a full back that likes to attack. If you're then moved to left centre back, the whole picture changes for you now. As good as a season as he's had there, because he's very confident on the ball and he progresses the ball well, it's just not his position. And you could say Yoro's not played at right or left centre back either in France. And therefore, when it comes to where he should be out of possession, and he's looking a bit like a rabbit in headlights at times, or he's going for high balls and letting them bounce over his head, as we saw in the Bournemouth game, for example, that is because of a hesitancy. That is because of an unsureness about where we should be. When De Ligt casually moves into the central midfield area and the two other centre backs split when Lamens gets the ball, that is unnatural for Matthijs De Ligt. So it does all come back to that. Like we said, we didn't want to be, when we said earlier, we didn't want to be reductive about, four at the back, three at the back, because it's about the principles within that and the understanding of the collective and what Amorim's trying to push, with this system. What is undoubted is that if the players don't know that system and they've not been coached it to a certain degree, there's going to be problems. There's going to be issues. You are going to concede, 2 goals a game. You are going to struggle to then get up the pitch and make amends for that. And that's why we're seeing high scoring games, the Villa game, the Bournemouth game. We're seeing these things materialize. So again, 4-2-3-1 or a 4-3-3 as I would have it, but a 4-2-3-1 would mean you're building with a 3+2. So instead of you could argue it's a 2-and-2 with a three at the back. So you Yoro and Shaw splitting, De Ligt coming into central midfield. You actually, or 2+3 with a back three. You're actually building with a 3+2 on a 4-2-3-1. So just to kind of show a bit of a diagram on that, if you say, for example, it's De Ligt and Martinez at central midfield, centre back in a 4-2-3-1, Luke Shaw to his normal left back position, you'd have Casemiro dropping in to provide the angle, and or Kobe Mainu. And they would be then asking for the ball offshore once that's gone out wide. Then it goes into the other midfield and away you go. You've got that kind of central build, if you like. And then you can look for the big switch on the right side, whether that's an Ahmad or an Mbumo, and that's when you're looking to isolate the defender one-on-one, etc. So that's your classic kind of 3+2 build. Um, and at the moment, we're seeing players just absolutely unsure about what to do next. So the ball generally keeps on coming back. It was no surprise, of course, to see when we had our most successful 5 or 6 game stint in this season, we went very direct. So it was like that was to me some learning that was happening. That was great to see. Like, oh, Amorim's understood. The build's not really happening with this 3-4-3 system. Let's go direct. Let's win second balls. Cunha had his best spell in a Manchester United shirt during that point, and we then had success. Now we're back to this playing out system. We've then thrown in the 1-4-2-3-1 at Newcastle, which did well for a half, and now we're just back to square one where, yeah, Wolves was just they were high pressing us. We couldn't get out, and I think they had a higher XG than us in the end. They had more chances on goal than should. If it wasn't for a sensational double save by Lamens, we might have even lost the game. So, yeah, I guess that's the basics of the different systems, Steve. But more than happy to chat through anything else as well.
You mentioned there a personal preference for a 4-3-3. How would that look for you and how would it function, moreover?
So yeah, I mean, there's a few people, a few analysts are talking about 4-3-3, and have done for a while, to be honest. At the end of Ten Hag's, period, shall we say? I still think that you're going to get the best out of Cobby in there. There's one thing we'll talk about is Ruben Amorim's misprofiling of players, and Mainu sadly comes top of that list. We've said, I think it's 3 shows ago that he's not a number 10. He's got quick feet, he's got an eye for goal. He can play the through ball, but he's not a number 10. He's not a Riquelme style player. He's not a Zinedine Zidane. Um, I can't remember who we said he profiles best against, but Luka Modric always comes to mind. He was often misprofiled early on in his career as the Roman 10. He wore 10 for Croatia, of course, and but he wasn't. I mean, that's the thing. So when he really got into his groove at Real Madrid, Modric played in a three, and he was the dropping deep. He was the ball carrier, the ball manipulator. He would cover ground. Didn't have to be fast. That's the other thing with this idea that Kobe isn't covering big amounts of ground. He's not fast enough. He's not strong enough. It's all absolute nonsense. He can be that Modric style player. So for me, it would be Casemiro, Kobe. Now on the other side, to the left of Casemiro, you could go stick with Bruno, of course, because I think he'll be better in a three than he is in a double pivot. And I think that a core issue of this season is that he remained and then remained in the six, so to speak, rather than that left 10 where he's sensational. But again, why not look at trying to get the best out of Cunha? And for me, it would be Cunha in a three. So Casemiro, Kobe, and Cunha. And that then gives Bruno license to move forward into the left side. I don't want to call it the left 10 because it's slightly different. But you'd have Cunha and Fernandez interlinking, interchanging in a narrow left side. It doesn't have to be symmetrical, of course. And Buma would hold the width on the far right. And Sesko would be there. Now again, it's interchangeable. We've not put Ahmad in this example, and Bumo could easily be the number 9, and while Sesko gets up to speed, Ahmad would obviously come in from the right side. Your back four, yeah, you don't. We've put up here, we've put Dillit and Yoro. That's potentially where we might see something going forwards. Of course, Martinez is in there at the present time. Heavens playing, out of his skin at the present time. So the person out at the back is less important in this scenario, but that's where you'd like to see a bit of change. You'd get control of the centre. You'd have that kind of 3+2 build going on, and then the different angles in the second phase, of course, as you're moving forward throughout the pitch. And you've got, carriers in Cunha and Kobe once Casemiro has kind of started the progressions. And of course, that won't be Casemiro, or it may not be Casemiro next season. That could be an Adam Wharton or an Elliot Anderson. And then the whole picture, improves once again. So, yeah, for me, it's about getting those closer angles together, dropping a little bit deeper. Again, ironically, the Newcastle average positions were what we'd like to see on a football pitch. You saw Cunha a lot narrower and deeper. He's not dropping to left back out of possession. He's not staying too far high and left in possession. We saw a classic 4-2-3-1 where we had control of the centre. And then, of course, we saw the Wolves' average positions, and it was back to that kind of scatter, that chaotic, with spaces everywhere and unsure positional aspects. So yeah, I think I'd be looking at this kind of 4-3-3, and working that way up and letting Mbumo be platformed in the right way, getting him in transition off that right wing when he's running at pace, then giving him the ball when he's one on one with his fullback. And then Bruno picking up the second balls on the edge of the area where we know he's got that deadly cross from the, just inside outside the corner of the penalty area, or shots on goal, of course. So that's something I would look at. There's not many people talked about the likelihood of Cunha in there, but I think it's something he would do well. And I think it might give him a bit more narrow focus as well. At the moment, we're seeing too much roaming from Cunha, trying to do too much, trying to carry when he should just be passing, releasing, and then and receiving higher. And I think something like that, a specific role, a bit like when he's put at false nine, when he's the kind of sole forward, it gives him that bit more kind of understanding of what is expected of him, gives him that focus, and he always plays better when he's got that.
Obviously, we're entering the transfer window now, the January transfer window. There's always going to be eyes on the summer window as well. If he were to theoretically were to revert to the this 4-3-3, how well equipped is he? How much would he need to delve into the transfer market, and how if he is working more towards the squad strength by going to a forward, a back, and then 2-3-1 or a 3-3 further forward, does that elevate the squad in terms of how strong it is compared to the rest of the Premier League?
I think so. You and I have spoken about the squad being about the fourth best in the league. All right, arguably fifth. We're talking about Villa having a fantastic season. But let's not forget they lost three of their best players in the summer. I think that often goes unnoticed. And yet Emery's having, superb impact there from a coaching point of view. So we've got the kind of fourth best or biggest, if you like. We have just spent £500 million. And when you look at the last couple of seasons, it's not just been the forwards that are talked of this past summer. It's from Le Mans, it's Yoro, Delit, it's your Dorgus, your Leons, your Heavens, your Ugartes. So people have been brought in aside from your Sesko, Cunhas, and Bumos, and that has to be remembered. So the squad is there, despite some of those signings arguably being wrong. We may well see a Xerxes leave in January, as we know. Ugarte's not lived up to anything that we kind of, well, some of us didn't expect when you look at Luis Enrique's use of him. But there's despite one or two not living up to standards, the squad is there. It just so happens that we're struggling at this moment in time, which is a very fair comment from Amorim and from fans in that kind of way of thinking. So what a 4-2-3-1 does, which is I think what he'll do rather than the 4-3-3, is platform players in the better way. It gives us more depth in each position. I mean, we just talked about the back line there. Right now, it would look like a Dallo, Heaven, Martinez, and Shaw, but we've got Delit to come back, Maguire to come back. If Dorgu does get his ass in gear, he could be there, obviously pushing for that left back role. So you've got the back line. That's more or less a given. In again, current players, you're looking at Casemiro and Fernandez keeping their double pivot positions. Cobby will have to come in and impress, as we know, if he wants to get into the team. That is something we've discussed in a lot of depth already this season. And then you've got, that whole host of forward-thinking players that just complements the kind of the next two lines, the three and the one. And there's so much you can do with that. So again, if you just look at current players and availability, you would have Mbumo in his Brentford role coming in off the right side. You would have Mount behind a number nine, which I'll come on to. You've got Ahmad there that could interlink on the left side if it wasn't to be Cunha. And for me at the present time, I'd just be easing in Sheshko. So I'd have Cunha there. I think it's no surprise to see Cunha's had his best games when he's played at nine, holds it up really well, back to goal, brings others in. You could have Mbumo and Ahmad coming in, in behind and breaking lines. So, you've got a whole host of players, and that's not even counting you as we said, Benjamin Sheshko there, the likelihood that Bruno can play higher and Kobe coming into that double pivot. You've got Xerxes, of course, if he's not to move on. There's so many options in a 4-2-3-1, whereas a 3-4-3, what's happening is you're kind of limiting your attack because you're saying, right, Ahmad, you're going to have to play wing back. Bruno, you're going to have to play in central midfield where we know you're not too comfortable off the ball. You do a lot of running around. You're good at nicking the ball, surprisingly good at nicking the ball off players. But you're not going to cover the right areas of the pitch in second phase transition when teams are countering with real precision and pace as we see in the Premier League at the moment. It's a real strong and competitive league tactically with your Brightons, your Bournemouths, your Fulhams. You know, you look at what Silva does on a low budget, some unbelievable coaching. So they're the kind of things like you're not then limiting your players and their potential. So sure, we already mentioned not being a natural centre back. Fernandez not a natural central midfielder. Ahmad not a natural wing back, and Bumo is not. It's funny because even though it's only like 10 meters more interior inside the pitch, and that changes so much. So going from a 11 to a 10, if we're talking tactics, changes so much about Mbumo's game. You'll remember when I was saying early on in the season when everyone was raving about, of course, I'm raving about. I think he's one of the best direct players in transition in the Premier League, and he's got so much potential, but he's playing within himself in this system, and that's not his fault. He's coming deep. He's coming towards the centre circle. He's asking for the ball back to goal. When he does turn, he's not fantastic at finding the next pass or finding the through ball or that build, that progressive pass, that kind of Scholesy pass. He's not good at that. Instead, he should be 10 meters higher and wider, and then receiving it in those positions. Then he can get at his defender. Um, I remember the first game of the season. I thought Calafiori had his worst game in an Arsenal shirt because of Mbumo going at him and starting wide, coming central. So we'd see more of that in a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-3-3. The platforming of players would be better. You wouldn't have Dorgu and Dallo left and right wing back that would, they're the ones being asked to receive the ball in the final third for the, pre-penultimate pass, if you like, or the penultimate pass. So, it's no surprise when Dorgu gets it. He's just on the edge of the opposition penalty area. He's not looked up. He's crossed it. Sesko's gone to the near post. The ball's gone to the back post. So, these things are inherent in the system. So, although it might be seen as, oh, it's lazy analysis and reductive, these are just facts. So, if you play a 4-2-3-1, you've changed the personnel around, you've changed the instruction, you've changed the principles, and you've changed your opportunity to win the bloody game. So, and to get better XG chances, better opportunities that arise, inside the penalty area or just outside the six. So, yeah, I mean, again, a convoluted answer, Steve. Apologies, but you're going to get the players playing in position. You're going to get Mount, who's doing so well at the moment, even in a left-hand position. But if you put him centrally and get him working closer to Casemiro and Fernandez, you're going to get better control of that football, better control of the game. And then you're going to get Mbumo, Ahmad, Cunha moving in the next phase at the right time, and Mount can find them, Fernandez can find them. So yeah, for me, it really is. It has become a simple thing. It's not that it was at the beginning. We trusted him to put the 3-4-3 in and try to emulate his success at Sporting, but now it's not working. It really is upon him to try and change. And if he doesn't, if he doesn't, what does um, the famous evolutionary principle of the selfish gene tell us? He will die. So if the gene doesn't replicate, it's not doing what it needs to do. Competition comes in, the organism will fail if that gene doesn't do what it needs to do. And that's Amorim's challenge.
That might be a channel first there, a literary reference. Thank you very much for raising the brow even higher. Superb. But to bring it back down to my level, the 5-year-old talking, it sounds like it's not a million miles away. If you look at on face value, the squad is there for an approach. One or two new signs. Obviously, a central midfielder is a game changer. You could argue a right back could lift things as well. And for me, there needs to be just a old school goal getter, a number nine who just lives and breathes goals just to lighten the load on the rest of the attack. Someone you can throw on for 20 minutes, a Chicharito or someone of that ilk who can just get you that goal, who can lighten the load, like I say, collectively. When you couple that with the fact that the manager has shown that he can adapt, he can bend to a new approach, the one that is more suited to the squad that's there. It doesn't feel like it's a million miles away from actually building proper momentum. Because as well, you also throw into the mix the fact that, like you said earlier, the players are playing for him. And that wasn't the case previously. Eric Ten Hag in his first season, yeah, second and his final kind of 3 or 4 months, evidently wasn't the case. So the players like him. All he really has to do then is I'm reading between the lines, is adopt that formational shift, and then the rest of the pieces have got a much better chance of falling into place, haven't they?
Well, yeah, that's the argument, isn't it? And that's the argument we'd like to make on this channel. I know, obviously, we've had to go through some of that kind of negativity, but that's where we're at. That's where the land lies. And I do think now it becomes essential that he adapts. Now, again, we can talk about, is that adapting within his present 3-4-2-1? But the evidence shows us that he's not able to do that. He's not learning from the same mistakes. He's not learning anything he's doing has not been sustainable. I mean, by virtue, right, of the fact that it's 13 wins, 14 losses in his time here. 33% win ratio in the league. So we know that what he's tried to do hasn't worked so far. Now you could say, well, yeah, but he needs he needs 2.5 seasons, or he needs three. Well, that the Premier League doesn't offer you that anymore. It doesn't offer you that luxury. There's teams now that could easily go above us in the pecking order. I'm not going to go through those teams again, but it's teams other than City and Arsenal and Liverpool, and that's the worry. So, it, he's not been putting the lessons in game by game or period by period. And then when you think he did with Newcastle, which was like real relief, and everyone was, I think most 95% of analysts and fans are, yes, this is what he needs to do. AFCON's come, this is what he needs to put in place with the injuries. And that second half was just was wretched against Newcastle. So even with the system, the subs within that, I think it was Xerxes then that pulled the team 20 meters back, and we just allowed Newcastle to come further and further into our half. And you see that the principles and the play out and the understanding of what to do when we get the ball and how to counter and how to counter press are still not there, no matter what the system is. And then, of course, the Wolves game, you're thinking, right, don't let that happen again. That was a terrible end to the game. It happens again in a 5-3 or, the 3-4-3. He's then changed back to what he knows best. So, yes, is the answer to your question, Steve. But we need some evidence, don't we, now at this point to say, right, something's going to change. It has to change, sorry. Otherwise, not only are we in trouble, he's going to be in trouble because Jim Ratcliffe won't be patient to the end with this, and that's a given as well, despite some of his public utterings. But again, long way round to answer your question. If we go and see what we've just talked through in terms of 4-2-3-1 or 4-3-3, profiling the players correctly, platforming the players in the right areas of the field, and with against their skill set, then he can turn it around. So it's not all doom and gloom. If we do bring in someone that now seemingly might not be January, but if we do look to bring in that central midfielder, the right back, the forward, there's rumours about Mateta at the moment. It's a good point you make, Steve, about someone just helping the load with Shesko. That's certainly not Rasmus, and thankfully Napoli are doing well. So there is a hope, there is a glimmer of a hope, and then your bench is looking strong all of a sudden. You have got options from the bench, your Amads, and you can even talk about Sheshko being on the bench. Yeah, Obi, I'm still keen to see again after last season. You've got Diego Leon who's showing promise. You've got your Fletchers or your youngsters. And all of a sudden, and your injuries are back, your Mazraouis, your um, Dillits, Maguires, you're then saying, right, we can push forward now, and there's only one or two areas of the field that need looking at, rather than as it stands with this 3-4-3. You are looking still to improve at least one position, so one player in each position, and that's the worry, is this squad overhaul that needs to happen still at this point. So yeah, it's an interesting one, and it's whether he can do that and get over that rigidity of thinking that we said is his downfall. That everyone said, even sporting fans and sport, you know, previous, how can we say, cohorts have said about Amorim. It's not just something United fans have invented. It is a rigidity of thinking. I'm sticking to my guns, my principles. I will do what I want, and I'll live and die by my sword. And that's all well and good. But we're now 24 wins in 62 games, and we finished 15th, and we're on track to finish, I think it's 8th or ninth with the current run rate. And we need better, and he can do better. And the question is, will he do better?
You mentioned win ratio there a couple of times, and yeah, obviously, if you extrapolate the overall 38.7% from his first 62 games, that's not sustainable, obviously, in the long run. And again, if you take it season by season, if you overall all competitions this season it's 40%, last season it was 38%. But if you look Premier League, which is the stick that he gets beaten with, the numerical stick he gets beaten with generally is the loss rate in the Premier League, because last season was very, very poor. It was a 25% win ratio. This season it's a 42% win ratio. Now, United should never be happy with a 42 win percent ratio in the Premier League. That's not who we are. That's not how we want to be. But going from 25 to 42 in a similar sample size, that is progress, is it not?
I don't know. I don't know, to be honest. There's some progress. There's definitely progress, and we to be fair, Steve, we've talked about the progress on the weekly chats, and we speak about the fact that you had to replace that forward line first and foremost, with the idea that your central midfielder is being looked at and heavily, recruited for and profiled, whatever you want to talk about. So we have said that, and things have improved in the final third. I guess the issue then becomes what happens before then, how we creating better chances as we move the ball through the field into that final zone. So you could argue, yeah, we've snatched draws, we've got a couple more wins in relative terms to last season, but the starting point was bad. So yes, you and I discussed that pre-season, right? Let's try and put that behind us. 15th, we went on a run on to go for the Europa, which at times meant he rested the squad. Not as much as might be said in hindsight, but at times he was rotating heavily. We remember Fredrickson at West Ham, and having a few hairy moments in other games, etc. Some of the youngsters coming in. Obi was there often, by the way, because Rasmus was just given time out, given time to rest, to try and get his head back on the game. So yeah, you can argue there was mitigating factors in the 15th position, but at the end of the day, that's where we finished under Amorim. Some of that's down to Ten Hag, of course, and not going to lie about that. But that's what happened with Amorim. Amorim had from November to do something better than 15th, and we didn't. So it's a bit of both. There's definitely been improvement. You look at the Villa game, we could have been, 2 or 3 goals up. You look at Bournemouth, should have been 3-0 at half time. Arsenal, we keep going back to. So there's definitely improvement. It's what kind of proportion, what percentage you want to put against that, and then we're not seeing the big improvement that you need. The consistency within that improvement is probably more important. And I think now, if you ask any United fan, what's the next game going to be? Well, Leeds is obviously the next game, but in general terms, what's going to happen in the next game? Nobody can tell you. Nobody, and that's the problem. So when we say, oh, we're facing a West Ham side that's just been taken over from Nuno, and he's, you know, this is a time to we're going to be, the Forest game was Dyche's first game, and they were bottom three at the time. We should easily that doesn't happen anymore. You can't predict results anymore, and that's because you don't know what United is going to show up from game to game, and that is sadly down to the coach and the coaching team. And I don't take away the coaching team, by the way. I think he needs that support, and we're still unsure what happens there, what support he is getting. When you look at the Artetas of the world and your Slots and your Emerys, they constantly have that bubble around them. There's always someone in their ear on the sidelines. The assistant is always with the notes discussing. We don't see that with Amorim. We see a solitary figure at times on the side. We see him standing in a solitary position at Carrington, 20, 30, 40 meters away from where the training's taking place. So, these are legitimate questions. Yes, there's been improvement, but to take that thinking a bit further, does 15th to 8th, and then what does next season become as improvement? 6th. It's how far you want to take it. I do think we're on a path, as your athletic colleague Ahmed rightly said, who's absolutely brilliant, by the way, and a super tactical writer. And I do think we are on a path, as he says. The question is, how long is that path, and how long are we willing to wait? And how long is Jim and the board willing to wait? And that is the key question here. And that comes back to them as to then, the recruitment policy around Amorim and this young tactician. And was he the right call at the right time?
Like you say though, it's the next game is the question, isn't it? And in a literal sense, that is Leeds. So it's fascinating. It's going to be fascinating to see which way he goes. If you take it on face value of he's embraced the four-man defence against Newcastle, then reverted back against Wolves and been stung. Just which way is it going to go? What will he do? What should he do at Elland Road, in your opinion?
Well, let's go with what he's likely to do. And in fairness, we've got the injury crisis at the moment and AFCON. So, when you look at what Leeds are going to do and set up, they'll be their stand, well, 3-5-2 at the moment. You've got, almost with certainty Dominic Calvert-Lewin will come back in. He seemed to be rested for us there when they played at Anfield last night. Um, so, he'll come in a front two, and it's almost certain in the same way that he mentioned Rob Edwards' approach with Wolves, that he'll go not man for man, but effectively matching the systems up. So I think we'll see the 3-4-2-1 again. The question is, will he play Xerxes? He seemed to be very unhappy with him last time out at Wolves. Kind of rightly so. I thought his off the ball work was quite terrible, and Ruben obviously was quickly onto that. But there's not that many other players that can challenge. So you're talking about two other players that could vie for that position. Either Fletcher will make a rare start after his little cameo again, as we saw, or is Mason Mount going to be fit? I did notice in his presser earlier that he said it's unlikely anyone will come back. We'll see. So something to those to that effect. So I suspect there might be one small surprise, and that could be someone like Mason Mount. In which case you'd have him in front of Ugarte and Casemiro, but it's likely to be, your four, your 3-4-3, with Xerxes coming in. It's where you play him, isn't it? I guess that's the question. He certainly can't be right 10 again. What do you reckon?
Yeah, no, I think I've done player ratings the last couple of games, and I always try and read the individual so much as, although the body language and behavior so much as what they're actually doing with the ball, and it possibly because you read so much and hear so much about possible transfers, looked to me like someone whose head wasn't absolutely focused on the here and now playing for United. It looked like someone who kind of felt his future lay elsewhere. And
Yeah.
if that's the case, then I mean, obviously Ruben's come out today and said that he doesn't expect that to be the case, which again, how much of that is a bargaining stance. If you want to be seen to be, if you're going to be seen to be happy to get rid of players, then you're not going to command the value you want for them. So that could be part of that. Um, no, I personally would rather see a different approach than have. So I mean, I have nothing against Joshua at all. I really like him. He's a great guy. He's a brilliant influence in the dressing room, to be fair, in terms of being very popular, just a great character around the place. Um, I think he described himself as a 9.5 when he came, and that, as we've seen, has been very, very difficult to shoehorn into this approach. So a little bit of time out for him if he is staying wouldn't be amiss as far as I'm concerned.
No, definitely. And let's hope then that it is that, he alluded in his press conference that someone's back. Let's hope it is a mount because there's no reason why we couldn't just play something like this. So, match them up man for man, go 3-5-2 rather than a 3-4-3. You'd keep with Heaven right centre back, Martinez central centre back, Shaw left centre back. Then I'd go three in the middle, a bit like the Villa approach. So you got Casemiro with a Ugarte and Mount just ahead. And again, that Mount might not be back. It could be Fletcher. Dallo left side. Bring Dorgu back over to this right side like he did so well for most of the game against Newcastle. And then you could play Seshko and Cunha kind of together. And I say that because at times Cunha is the most advanced. You see Seshko dropping really deep. I think it's one thing that Amorim's talked about getting Seshko to hit the 6 yard a bit more frequently, getting in the box. But if not, that's not where he's at in his development. Then what play to his instincts, which is to drop a bit deeper and get Cunha beyond him. Cunha's had one of his best games at Anfield, and two or three other occasions where he's played in that false nine. I think there was Wolves away, he did well. So you could just match Leeds up 3-5-2, Cunha roaming around Sesko or vice versa, and that keeps him narrow, keeps him hungry in and around the area where he can do most damage, and doesn't mean he's drifting too deep and losing the ball, which to be fair he was doing against his former club last time out. And we want to see a little bit more from the Brazilian in truth. So there's no reason why we can't look at that for the game, and then Xerxes potentially to come on. At least we've got something there from the bench. Um, but yeah, the only other thing I was thinking, Steve, is he could bring in Euro and push Martinez into that kind of DCM role, maybe something like this. So it'd be very similar. So instead of Mount, you've got there Yoro and then Martinez pushed into central midfield, just behind Casemiro and Ugarte. Again, Dallo left, Dorgu right, Sesko and Cunha interlinking up front. So I hope we see something like that. Would it be the game to go 4-2-3-1? Probably not, actually, given everything we've just said, given everything we've just talked about and reprimanded him for, etc. But if they're on some form at the moment, Leeds, they've given Liverpool a really good game with their structured 3-5-2. Calvert-Lewin will cause us all sorts of problems in the channels. So maybe Martinez just sat in front of that back three might be a blessing in disguise. You never know. And you look at Goodmanson's impact and Justin on the other side, and they're quite good, down the wide areas and in the front area. So it's certainly going to be a challenge. It's not something we wanted to do going in there with a weakened squad, is it? Into the cesspit of Elland Road. But we've just got to go for it. They've got a couple of issues. I know the Ampadu's out, the captain, Strike, their number fives. He's needs to be got at. He's very unsure. So there'll be a couple of areas where we can target and hopefully, don't come away with the tail between our legs.
That's the thing, isn't it? Like you say, it's so unpredictable from game to game, especially this one. It feels like because who knows the expectation level, the whole how the atmosphere will affect things, how the atmosphere can affect them. Because obviously, they're on a good run at the minute, but prior to that, the relationship between the fans and the manager, Daniel Farke, wasn't great at all. That feels like it could turn at any given moment. So it's going to be fascinating, as will the rest of the season and probably beyond. Who knows what's going to happen? Just in terms of everything we discussed there, with I think a very fair and detailed assessment of where we're at with Ruben, what has changed, what could still change. I think that's top work. And yeah, thank you very, very much.